Baphomet's Casino. A short story written, narrated, and produced by Stephen Dark. David Collins stared lazily and unfocused at himself in the bathroom mirror, splashed his face with cold water and slurred aloud to himself. "Pull yourself together, man. 43 years old. Not bad looking. It's not the end of the world." It had been a bad day. His boss had been very apologetic. Economic crisis, cutbacks, etc., etc. David was out of a job. Several bars later, and a little drunk, the flashing red neon sign of Baphomet's Casino drew him in like a magnet. Another few shots at the bar. He needed to freshen up before hitting the tables to try his luck. A sultry redhead in a slinky red dress hovering near the roulette wheel had caught his eye. "I'm sure she smiled at me," he thought, smiling to himself. Drying his face, he checked his wallet, took a deep breath, left the washroom, headed to the counter to buy some chips, then sauntered as casually as he could towards the roulette table. David placed a couple of chips on red 16. He didn't know why. He glanced at the lady in red, who nodded approvingly at his choice. The wheel spun. "Red 16, called the croupier. "Beginner's luck," he thought to himself. The redhead smiled encouragingly at him. Fortified by his win, he piled up a few more chips, this time on black 26. The lady edged a little closer and blew a cloud of cigarette smoke as the wheel spun. "Black 26. Another win. The excitement around the table was building, and fired with newfound confidence, David ventured to open a conversation with the alluring redhead in the red dress. "You seem to be my lucky charm." The lady smiled and purred. "Maybe I am." "What next?" he inquired casually. Looking intently at him, her green eyes seemed to glow incandescent with fire. "I'm sure you'll win whatever you choose." And he did, and he did, and he did. Almost the equivalent of a year's salary. Things were looking up, a pile of money and a beautiful 30-something woman at his side. "You really are my lucky charm. Let's have a drink at the bar." She accepted, and helped with the large stack of chips he'd amassed at the table. They arranged themselves comfortably on a couple of stools as the bartender poured a couple of large whiskies. "My name is David." "I know," she replied, leaning forward a little as the bartender lit her cigarette. "But you couldn't know my name. I've never been here before. I don't know why I came in. It was, well, an impulse." "I know that too," she said enigmatically. An expression of puzzled intrigue spread across his face. "But we've never met. I don't know your name. It isn't possible. How could you know?" "You can call me Phaedra, and I know all about you. What time is it now, David?" "Oh, yeah, casinos don't have clocks, do they?" David looked at his watch. "It's almost midnight. What do you know?" He grasped his whiskey glass and glugged half of it nervously. "What's the date today, David?" she asked in a soft, almost conspiratorial tone. It's 23rd of March. Why? Why is that important?" He glugged the remaining whiskey and gestured to the bartender for another. I don't have to tell you, really, do I? Phaedra pressed his hand gently. It's okay. I know it was an accident, she said, encouragingly. David almost spluttered on his whiskey. What accident? You can't possibly know that about that. It really wasn't my fault, he blurted. David, it was a mistake, not the accident. That was part of the program, but there was the slightest ripple in time, and the pedestrian shouldn't have died. David started shaking uncontrollably. I don't understand. What do you mean it was a mistake? What program? I. David was lost for words. Phaedra cut in sharply. David, time is short. 1 minute after midnight on the night of 23rd of March, 22 years ago. Your brakes failed. You hit a pedestrian, a woman in her 30s who later died of her injuries. You survived. That was the mistake. The ripple, it shouldn't have been her, but you were supposed to swerve to avoid her. Your car would have run off the road into a tree and you should have died. Not her. Oh, come on. What's all this nonsense? It's not. How could. Failing for words like a man drowning, he glugged the rest of his whiskey. Phaedra looked at David sympathetically and continued in a very matter-of-fact way. You have less than a minute left, I'm sorry. You won't remember any of this. David's head began to spin with confusion, anger, surprise, and guilt, but before he could continue, his surroundings started to become less solid, slowly dissolving in swirls of bright, drunken, multicolored fairground lights that gradually dimmed and faded into the liquidity of velvet darkness. David Collins had had a bad day, out of a job, and several bars later a drunken David Collins stumbled uneasily across the road towards Baphomet's casino. The flashing neon sign above the huge, ornately carved door drew him as a moth to a candle flame. The last thing he saw were the twin headlights of a car careering out of control towards him. That was bad luck, the bartender said sympathetically while tapping the newspaper story with his index finger and reading aloud. The driver, a 32-year-old woman whose brakes failed, was taken to hospital and said to be badly shaken and in shock, but not injured. The bartender shook his head at the irony of life. He seemed like a nice guy, and after winning all that money at roulette too. Phaedra leaned forwards for a light, and her fiery green eyes flashed at the stack of chips in the handbag aside her drink as she spoke. Yeah, he really was a nice guy, but when the chips are down... Her words tailed off as she took a drag of her cigarette.